Alright, hello and welcome to ETeeski Tutorials. You are watching the Ultimate Game Dev tutorial series. So in our last episode we created this little dice thing over here and we were introduced to the idea of UV maps. So in this episode we're going to take that idea a little bit farther, and instead of modeling something that is kind of irrelevant to our game, we're going to actually UV map something that's really going to be in our game, which is this desk. And we have a couple other models that we could do as well, but I want to start off with this desk because it's pretty boxy and fairly simple. So it's going to be more complicated than that cube or that dice over there, for sure. It's going to be more complicated than that, but at least it won't be quite as complicated as, say, the computer or the chair, because, well, it's still somewhat simple to a degree. But anyways, so yeah, I guess let's go ahead and get started. And one thing I want to say before I do get started is that if I make any mistakes, I'm going to try not to make any mistakes. But there's a tendency for that to happen with me with UV mapping. Sometimes you just gotta experiment around, and sometimes things don't happen quite the right way the first time. So if that happens to me in this episode, I think that that is an okay thing, because chances are a very similar problem is going to happen to you as well, because that happens all the time in video games, is that you go to try to make something and it doesn't quite work the right way the first time, and that's definitely going to happen, especially with UV maps. So if you watch me make a mistake, hopefully I will be able to fix that mistake, and then you will know how to fix the same mistake if you make a similar mistake. So yeah, just that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into it, and let's add a wooden sort of looking texture to this desk. So the first thing we need to do is work on the UV map, and we need to do that inside of Blender. So because we already have this desk as a .blend file that we can open up inside of Blender, let's go ahead and open up that file and then start editing the UV map. So I can either get to the mesh of this desk right here by selecting it and then going over here to the mesh filter component in the inspector window and clicking on just clicking on where it says table boxy, and it will highlight it for me in here. And there we go, there is the table boxy Blender file. If I right click on it and go to show in Explorer, you'll see that it's a .blend file. So I can either double click it right there, or I can double click it right here and it will open up inside of Blender. So there we go, we're inside of Blender, we have our desk. And let me scroll down and turn on Start Display so that you can actually see what buttons I'm pressing. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and let's add a UV map to this. So we are in edit mode, and I'm going to create a new window by dragging this corner over. And right now this is a 3D view because it copied what we had over here. So let's change it to our UV image editor. So here we go, we have our image UV editor, and now what I want to do is start cutting apart this desk in places where I think that it needs to be cut apart. So first of all, I think the simplest part that we need to start off with is the top of the table. We're going to cut this apart, and we're going to cut a seam around this rectangle, and we're going to cut that seam, and that's going to be the top of the desk, and we'll put it into our UV map. So one thing I can do, I can either go to edge mode and select all of these lines individually by holding down shift right click, or I can just go into face mode, select the face, and then go into line mode. Actually, I think I could stay in face mode or line mode. It doesn't really matter. But that's one nice little trick, is when you're selecting a face and then you go into line mode, it's just going to select all of those lines that make up that face. So that can be a little shortcut for you, sometimes useful. So anyways, I'm going to hit T to pull up my toolbar, whatever this thing is called. And I'm going to go down to my UV tab, and I'm going to click on Mark Seam. And if I deselect that, you can see that those edges are now red, and that means that we're going to cut apart those edges. And I guess for now, let's make this window smaller so that we have more room to see what I'm doing over here. I guess the next thing I want to do, I guess I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. So the next part is this ridge all along the outside of my desk. So we need to cut that apart. So we could go to line mode, and select that. And you can see that it's actually made up of a bunch of different little lines. So let's hold down Alt right click. Whoops, wrong loop. Alt right click. Yeah, wrong loop again. So sometimes loop select doesn't really work the way that you expected it to. So I guess in this case we might have to do that manually. I'm trying to think if there's a faster way that we could do it to select that edge all the way around. Yeah, I guess we could either do that manually by holding down Shift right click and just going around and selecting the whole thing. But one thing that I know is that I also want to select those lines as well, because I want to cut those apart. Because if I didn't cut those apart and I just cut apart this whole loop all around the outside of the desk like that, and it goes all the way around, the problem is that it's going to cut in, well, like a loop, and it's going to skew it when we bring it into our UV window over here. When we unwrap it, it's going to skew in a really, really weird way. It's going to stretch this in a really weird shape because it doesn't know how to unwrap it because, well, I'm trying to think of how to describe this. I guess I'm going to have to just show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these 4 faces, and I will do that. And I'll just show you this as an example for right now. Let me go to line mode, and let me deselect. I'm going to hold on Shift and right click on these corners and deselect those. That way I'm only selecting this ring around here. And I guess I can also deselect those, but we're going to mark those anyway. So let's go ahead and leave them marked. And I'm going to hit Mark Seam. And then when I deselect with A, you will see that I have like 2 square rings that go around the edge of my desk. One up here and one down here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just select these faces. Now normally I just hit A and select everything and unwrap everything all at once, but I want to unwrap just this one part right here just to show you what happens when we don't mark seam on these little lines right here, and how it is like a connected loop and how it's going to skew itself and get really messed up. So I have that selected, and I'm going to select unwrap, and I'm just going to hit unwrap. See what I mean? See how that's like, it tried its best, but it just, because of the way that it was shaped, because these are all, you know, vertical going up and down, and it wants to project it onto, you know, a 2D flat surface. See how that, like, it's just really, really, really messed up, and that's going to look really ugly when we import that, or when we use that to unwrap our texture. So let's try that again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 4 of these faces, or I'm going to leave them selected, so I'm going to hit Control Z because they were already selected. And with them selected, I'm going to hit Mark Seam so that it marks the seam of the lines that make up those faces on all 4 sides of each of these really long rectangles. So I'm going to hit Mark Seam, and then when I deselect it, you'll see what I mean. We have the top edge selected, we have this bottom ring that goes all the way around that selected, and we also have these tiny little vertical lines selected as well. So I'm going to select all 4 of those again. Shift right click, and there we go. Alright, and I'm going to unwrap it again, so it's going to redo the unwrapping that I have over here because I have these selected. So unwrap, unwrap, and bam, there we go. That is a heck of a lot better, and that actually looks pretty close to what we wanted. That's a little bit weird. I wasn't expecting that to happen. Like I said, sometimes weird things can happen when you're doing UV unwrapping. I don't know why it did it like that. One thing we can try is unwrapping it in a different way down here. And because this thing is so boxy, I'm going to try using cube projection. So I'm going to select that. And now when I look at it, well, these things are, let me move this over so that you can see this a little bit better. They're all, you know, they're outside of this square, which is not what we want. We want to reshape these and move them around so they're all fitting inside the square. But you can see that now they're all nice and straight, which is what we wanted. So to fix that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to select my object mode. So we have vertice, line, face, and because we're in UV unwrapping, we also have, well, I guess maybe object mode. What is it called? I'm not really sure what it's called. Island mode? Well, whatever. Wait, is it called island mode? I never actually, yeah, I guess it's called island mode. I wouldn't have called it island. I always call it like object or group. Well, whatever. We're going to click that button, and basically that's going to select everything that is connected to the thing that we click on. So I'm going to first select that. I'm going to hit G. I'm going to move it over there. I'm going to select that. I'm going to hit G, and I'm just going to kind of organize these in a way. And those two were on top of each other, which is okay. It doesn't really matter. I can right click, select both of those, and then move those. So now that I have all of these selected, I'm going to select all 4 of them, and I'm going to scale them down so that they're inside of our UV map square. So I'm going to grab that, I'm going to move that up there, and I'm just going to continue to unwrap different parts of our desk. Let's go ahead and unwrap the top of our desk. So I'm just going to select that, and you can see that those faces go away. They will only show what you have selected. So if I shift right click, and I select all those again, now you can see them in my UV window. We do have a button down here so that we can make it so that we can see everything no matter what you have selected over here. You can just see everything that's been unwrapped in whatever object you're currently editing. But we'll get back to that in a second. It is pretty useful, but we'll get back to that in a second. Let's start off with selecting the top of this desk and just unwrapping the top part of it. So I'm going to go to unwrap, and bam, there we go. It's actually very simple. And I'm going to select that, and I'm going to scale it down a little bit. I'm actually going to go over here at my 3D view, and I'm going to hold down Control plus on the number pad to grow my selection. And I just know that that's going to grow it around the edges as well and select these bottom edges because I want those selected too so that I can see them over here. So let me drag that window over so we can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to grab the surface of my desk, and yeah, I guess I'll just leave it like that. I think that looks pretty good. I can, move it over there if I want it to be more organized. It doesn't really matter too much. And they can overlap if you want, and we'll talk about that more in a second. We'll do the overlapping with the legs, and then you'll see what I mean when we can overlap things. So there we go. We got the top of the surface and these edges all done, so let's move on. Alright, so what should we do next? I guess it would be pretty good to do the bottom of the desk. So we could just select everything that's on the bottom of the desk, and how should we select that? Well, whoops. One thing I want to do is, I'm trying to remember how we modeled this. I'm going to go into wireframe mode. Maybe we can see it a little bit better. I believe the bottom of the desk is actually, well, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Alright, let me backtrack. I want to just select this little underside of the desk. Let's just put it that way, and we'll unwrap just that part. So I can go here, I can manually select all of these, but that's going to take a little while. So one thing I can do is just select one of them, and I can press Shift G for select similar, and I can do coplanar, or something that's basically on the same plane, which basically is, well, I mean, if you imagine a plane for this face, if it's a flat surface, and if I were to stick, if I were to lay a piece of paper on it, this like a magical piece of paper that stretches on for infinity, all the other faces that also lie on the same piece of this magical infinity paper are going to be coplanar. So basically, if they're the same height, same rotation, and all of that stuff, they're coplanar. So I'm going to just select one of them, Shift G, and then select coplanar. And if I zoom out, actually I'm going to hit period to center my view, I can look around and you can see that it has selected all of those edges. And I'm going to hit Z to go into wireframe mode just to see exactly what I'm selecting. And you can see we have some overlapping faces. We did that when we were modeling this before, but that's okay. So it's going to take everything that I have selected here, and it is going to unwrap it. And one thing that I just thought of is that by selecting all of those different things, I'm also selecting the lines in the middle as well, and I actually don't want to do that. I'm trying to think of the best way I can do to fix that. Well, I guess now that I can see it, now that I've selected it, and I know that I want to cut this shape out, I can see what lines I actually do want to select. and that would be these 4 lines like that, and the interior lines of all of these, the tops of the table legs. So I'm going to select those lines, and I'm probably going to need to be in wireframe mode to do that. And I'm going to take a shortcut right here, and I'm going to select, whoops, that's not the right face. Is that the right face? I think that's the right face. It's hard to tell. No, that's not the right face. Where is the right face? Does it even have a face? I don't think it actually even does now that I think about it. Alright, so I'm going to go to line mode, and I'm going to try to just carefully select the inside here. So if I move my view around, I can see that intersects with the corner of the table there. So I'm going to select that, select that, select that, and I think that is what I want to mark seam on. I guess this comes into play when in the previous episode when I said that, let's just be lazy. I guess this is where it's kind of giving us problems later on when I said, let's just be lazy and let these faces overlap. So I guess that's just a good example of how being lazy can sometimes kick you in the butt later on. So, but that's okay. I selected that, and let me try going into face mode again. Let me go into press Z to go back into solid view, and let me select one of these faces and Shift G, coplanar. Let me go back into Z. Alright, so there we go. It's probably hard to tell, but there's a slight little red line right there. You can see underneath the selection as a little bit of red to it. So I did select the right lines. So now let's do the same thing with the 4 corners of the legs of the table. So I'm going to hit A to deselect, and I know that it's that. I actually wonder what happens if I do Alt right click. Whoops, Alt right click, Alt right click. Nope, it didn't detect the loop. Oh, that would have been just too convenient, right? Oh well. It's, I have to look very carefully and I have to change my view, but I can see that those are the lines that I want. See how they touch just right there, and how they touch, with those lines, that's the edge of our table. So I'm just being very careful and looking at this from different angles to really make sure I'm selecting the correct lines. So I'm going to do the same thing on all 4 corners. And I'm going to go over here. Select, 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 select. I'm being careful to hold down Shift because I want to select all of these at once. Alright, I believe I have everything selected, and if I change my view, they all look like they're coplanar, or, at the same height. So there we go. I'm going to hit Mark Seam, then hit A, and that looks pretty good to me. Let's do one more check. I'm going to select one of these faces and do Shift G, coplanar, and there you can see that the shape that has selected, the shape we're trying to cut out, the bottom of our table, it includes these 4 little squares that I've selected and the big square in the middle. So I'm pretty sure I have selected the correct stuff. So now that I have all of these selected by doing that coplanar trick, now let's unwrap what I have selected. So it's selected, so I just go to unwrap, unwrap, and that did not work the way that I thought it would. So let's try a different way. Let's try cube projection. Nope, that didn't work either. So let's just keep on trying until one of these works. Smart UV project. Okay. That is somewhat close. That's actually probably the closest that we've gotten so far. It's just that it's stretched sideways. But that looks pretty close. So let's go ahead and just use that one. So I'm going to drag this window over so that we have more room, and I'm going to select this, and I'm going to hit SX, and I'm going to scale it until it doesn't have to be totally perfect, but I'm going to try to get it as close as I can. That looks pretty much like what I want it to be. Now I'm going to rotate it by 90 degrees, and I'm going to scale it down a little bit, and I'm going to move it down a little bit because I know that my table is somewhere around here. Not my table, the top surface of the table. So I'm actually going to press A in my 3D view to select everything so that I can see everything that I've unwrapped so far. And yeah, it looks like I got them about the correct size. So I'm going to hit G, and I'm just going to kind of line those up just to keep things organized. Try to keep them about the same size. And yeah, that's good enough to me. So yeah, that was a little bit sloppy and a little bit messy, but it ended up working out. So yeah, like I said, I was going to run into problems at some point in this episode because I was also going really fast with this model when I modeled it in an earlier tutorial. So now that we got that, let's now do the underside of the table and let's start with the under ridges. Let's do the two of them at once because they're connected anyways. So let's do that and these like underside ridges. So I'm going to select all 4 of those and I'm going to hit Z to see what they look like. It looks like they're all connected just like that. So actually what I'm going to do, since let me hit Control Z because I want to have those selected. Since I'm in face mode, I'm going to go to line mode, and now I have all of the lines selected of those faces that I had selected. And I want to keep these 4 things connected. I mean, it's not super necessary, but I kind of want to keep them connected. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to deselect these lines in the middle that would otherwise cut this apart. So I'm going to hold down Shift, right click, and I've deselected that. And I'm going to do Shift, right click, oops, wrong one, Control Z. Let's try that again, Shift, right click, there we go. We got the right one that time. And I'm just going to keep on doing that until I have the, oh, wrong line. Shift, right click, there we go. So now I'm just left with this inner outline and the outer outline. So that way it's going to keep all 4 of these segments together. So now that I have those selected, I'm going to select Mark Seam. Now I'm going to go into face mode. Actually, I'm going to press Z to go out of wireframe mode. And I'm going to select those 4 faces that I just outlined. And with those selected, I'm going to go to Unwrap, Unwrap, and bam, that worked pretty good that time. So I'm going to select that and I'm going to scale it down. And I'll move that over, and I'll probably move it again later once I try to get more organized. But next, what I want to do is I want to unwrap these outside boxes, or not boxes, the outside faces. I'm going to unwrap those. So I'm going to select these. Now I'm going to hit Control plus on my number pad to grow my selection. So it just grew outwards. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect those. And bam, there we go. So now that was just a little bit faster than manually selecting that, going to inside, selecting that, selecting that, selecting that. It just goes a little bit faster. So there we go. We have the faces that I want to have selected. I'm going to hit Z to see what they look like. And yeah, I want to cut all of those apart. And yeah, I'm just going to cut all of those apart because I think that's going to work good, or at least I'm guessing. So anyways, let's go to just mark seam, and it's going to mark all of the lines that make up all of the faces that I have selected. And when I hit A to deselect those and go into wireframe mode, you can see that all of those are selected. And it's starting to get a little bit complicated, but no, that's okay. Whoops, let me hit Z to go into that mode. And I was going to say we should select this face next and then, outline that. But because all of these faces are connected to this face and they all share an edge, those seams have already been marked. So I don't have to select that and go to mark seam. Well, I mean, I can if I want, but they're already marked, so it won't actually do anything. Okay, so we got that, and let's go ahead and unwrap it. Why don't we go ahead and just unwrap it all at once? So I'm going to select those again, and I'm going to do my grow selection trick, Control plus, and now I'm going to hold down Shift, right click. I'm going to deselect those because I already have those unwrapped. And I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to select that little middle section as well. And that's all good. I am going to unwrap it. And unwrap, and bam, there we go. So we have a lot of stuff in here that we need to now organize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first scale that down. And I'm going to move, whoops, wrong button. I'm going to press G, and I'm going to move that over. And now I'm going to select all of these. And because they're, well, some of them you can see on the outside, but some of them are going to be on the inside of the table and they probably don't matter as much. I could spend the time like organizing these and overlapping them, and maybe that is something that's worth doing, but for now I'm just going to scale them down and put them off to the side. One thing to note when you're doing UV mapping is that the smaller you make something, the less detail that surface is going to get. In other words, it's going to take that image, like that JPEG or the texture that we create, And because it's taking, part of that JPEG or that image that's, a smaller part of the image and then blowing it up to this size, it's going to pixelize. So, we don't want to make them too small, but we'll figure that out in just a minute once we unwrap everything else. Okay, so the next step is the feet. That's all we have left, are the legs. And I'm going to be really lazy with them, and I'm going to show you a cool trick. I'm just going to select the bottoms of all of these feet. And now, whoops, I missed it. Now I'm going to hit Control plus, and whoops, my mouse cursor was over here. I meant for my mouse cursor to be over here. Control plus, there we go. That time it worked. And I'm going to just mark a seam on all of those so that the outlines of all of those faces are now marked. And I'm going to hit Control Z because I want to have that selection there. And I'm going to, with those selected, I'm going to go to unwrap, unwrap, and bam, there we go. We have the sides of all of those legs. And we have the bottoms of the feet, which I'm going to move these over. For now, I'm just going to stick those over there, and I'm going to come back to them later. I'm just putting them over there to get them out of my way. You don't want to leave them there at the end. You want to put those inside of this square here, because that's where the image of our UV map is actually going to be. So it's just a lot better if you put it on the inside of this square. But for now, I'm going to just get them out of my way and temporarily put them over there. So let me drag this over so I have a little bit more room. So each one of these is a side of all of the legs, and every leg has 4 sides, and we have 4 legs, so 4 times 4. We should have 16 of these here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlap all of these because I want them to all be the same. Because honestly, I don't care about each side of every leg having its own unique texture. I mean, it's a side of a leg. I mean, they're all square and boxy. I might as well put the exact same image on all 4 legs and on all 4 sides of all 4 legs. So I'm just going to put the same thing on all of them. So how do we do that, you ask? Well, we just overlap them, just like that. We just keep on moving them on top of each other. And it doesn't have to be super perfect. We can create an image that kind of goes around the outside of this just to give us a little room for error when we go into GIMP and actually create the texture. So it doesn't really matter. We can have those be separate. Or I mean, not separate. We don't have to line them up perfectly is what I'm trying to say, because we're just talking about slopping a wood texture on here. So, in some cases you would want to try to get it perfect, and I'll show you some tricks later on to get it perfect, but for now, I don't think it really matters. We'll just eyeball it. So I'm going to right click on that. I'm going to grab that over there. And, this is going kind of slow. So let's take some shortcuts. So I'm going to go to this bottom row, and I'm going to select all of those. And now I'm going to hit G, and I'm going to go up there like that. So now all of those are selected. And let me try moving it over. I guess some of them need to be moved a little bit because they're a little bit not lined up. Oh, whatever. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to get it like somewhat close. All right, there we go. And one thing we can do now is, well, let's go into face mode so that we can see these little black dots in the middle. And I'm going to use my box select tool, which is just B, just like that. So because I have 3, so I have 6, so I'm going to divide 6 by 2. That means 3. So I'm going to select all of those, and I'm going to grab those. I'm going to move them so they overlap those. So that's just a faster way of getting them all to line up on top of each other. I'm actually going to hit Control Z, and I'm going to move those and try to line them up even better. Yeah, that's about as close as it's going to get. Whatever, that's good enough to me. And we can keep on doing that. And the reason why I use box select just to select it like that is because if I just right click on it, it's going to select only one of those faces that's in this like pile of faces. But if I do box select, it's going to select all of them. So I'm going to do that, move that over, and then I'm going to box select to make sure all of those are selected. I'm going to move that over on top of this one over here. And there we go. I mean, it's not perfect, but they're all stacked on top of each other, and they're all going to have practically the exact same image on all of these surfaces. It's just that, they're very, they vary up just a little bit. They're not perfectly stacked, but it's close enough for our purposes for this example. So I'm going to box select that, and I'm going to move it kind of over there like that. And now I'm going to take the feet of the table, and I'm probably going to do the same thing with these. I'm just going to drag them all roughly on top of each other. And you can, we'll learn later how to make it perfect, but for now, I don't really care. I'm just going fast, and I don't think it's going to look any better or any worse in this example if we make it line up perfectly. So there we go. We got everything unwrapped. So I'm going to hit A inside of here so that I can see everything. And we can see that we need to move some stuff around because we have some overlap going on here, which isn't the end of the world because most of this desk is just going to be wood. But I'm going to move it around so they're not overlapping so much. And I also want to kind of scale things down so that everything is roughly proportional to each other. So I'm going to select, let's go to this object thingy mode, or I guess it's called island mode. I don't know why it's called that, but yeah, I'm going to select that button right there so that it selects everything that's connected. And I'm going to move this. Oh, where should I move this? Let's move it kind of like on top of this thing so that that's in the center. I'm going to hit shift, add those together. I'm going to scale these down because I don't think they're going to be as important because they're on the underside of the table. Actually, now that I think about it, that's pretty big too. So let's grab it and then let's hit S to scale it. Let's make that a little smaller. One rule of thumb is that, different surfaces in our UV map, depending on how important you think they are, you make the more important ones bigger and the least important ones are the ones that are like on the underside or inside the crevice or somewhere where you don't think the player is likely going to see that surface. Feel free to make those ones smaller if you want to make use of the space in our image. So yeah, there we go. We could play around with this UV map and make it, more organized and overlap some of the faces that we think are going to have the same, image or texture on top of them. But for now, I'm going to leave it like this. And yeah, let's go ahead and press Control S to save our .blend file. So Control S, save, and there we go. Now our model is exactly the same, except it has UV information. So now let's export this UV by going down to UVs, export UV layout, and I'm going to save this inside of, where should we save this? Let's go up a folder. Whoops, up a folder. Let's save it inside of GIMP files and textures. And I'm going to rename this to desk boxy UV layout, just like that. And you can name it whatever you want, whatever makes sense to you. So I'm going to just save it, make sure it's a .png and all that. We can change the file size down here if we want, like if we want it to be 512 by 512. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, just for example. So 512, 512, and there we go. So yeah, looks good to me. Let's go ahead and export it. And now I'm going to open up GIMP. Opening, load, and here we go. I'm going to go to File, Open, and I want to, I guess these are my recently used stuff, but I want to go to this folder, or I mean that drive, that folder, this folder, Indoctrination, GIMP files and textures, and where is it? It is my desk boxy UV layout. So I'm going to open that up, and bam, there we go. We have the UV layout for our desk. So yeah, where to begin? Well, I'm going to, I guess I'm going to minimize this for now, and I want to go into Unity, and I want to show you that we now have the UV layout actually inside of this desk, even though it looks exactly the same. But remember on this desk, when I dragged a material on top of it, it just turned all gray, and we didn't get any of the cardboard box information on this table because it didn't have a UV layout. Well, now if I drag the same material on top of this mesh, because it does have a UV layout, it's not going to be proportional to what this cardboard box wants to look like, but at least it won't be a flat gray. It will actually get some of that cardboard box texture to it, all those little rips, all that little noise, all of that little stuff. So let's go to our materials, cardboard, and let's drag and drop it on top of there. So you can see that, it looks kind of like a table made out of a cardboard box. And I'm betting that somewhere on here, you might be able to see the barcode. I'm actually curious. Well, I guess not. Somehow we missed the barcode. Oh well, that's okay. And then we can also drag and drop the dice on top of that as well. But if this didn't have any UV information on it, because remember when we saved it inside of Blender, we were actually saving over, let me go to my models folder, we were actually saving over this file here, and this file is this mesh. So when we save over that file, it's updating the information on this mesh. So now this has a UV layout built into it, and now it knows how to cut apart the texture. So now we need to give it a texture that has been created for that UV layout, or for that cut apart and fold pattern, I guess is one way to describe it. But yeah, so let's go into GIMP and let's actually do that. So here we go. Here is the UV layout. And one thing you might notice is that a lot of this stuff we might have forgotten what all of these different things were. Like, you know, is that the top of the table? Is that the top of the table? Are those the legs? I just don't remember. You know, I mean, I kind of do remember because I did that just a second ago. But I'm going to show you a trick that is really useful. So first I'm going to save this inside of Unity, and then I'll do the export thing, and then I'm going to show you the trick for figuring out what all of these different faces are. So I'm going to press, let's do Control-Shift-S to save a new XCF file, and I'm going to save this inside of my Ultimate GameDev project. Double click, there we go. Assets, textures, and I'm going to call this, desk boxy, but I'm going to rename that texture. So instead of UV layout, I'm going to say texture, because we're going to edit this, and it's no longer just going to be a UV layout, it's going to be an actual texture. So let's save that. It's saved, cool. Now let's export it as a file that, and I'll show you here, as a file that Unity can actually use, because right now we just have the GIMP file, or the .xcf file, and Unity doesn't know what to do with that. So we need to export it as a JPEG so that Unity can actually use that image. So go to GIMP, I'm going to go to Export As, and I want to make sure I'm in the right folder, Ultimate GameDev Project, Assets, Texture, perfect. And I'm going to save it to file type JPEG. Where's my JPEG? There's the JPEG. So desk boxy texture, that's a good name, .jpeg, that's the file type I want. Cool, that's where I want to save it. So let's export it. And I'm going to drag that quality down just a little bit so that it loads fast. And that was pretty fast. So let's now go into Unity, and now you can see we have the texture. So let's create a new material and put this texture on the material and then put it on the table. So I'm going to go to my materials, I'm going to right click, go to create, I'm going to go to material, and I'm going to call this desk boxy, just like that. Now I'm going to go to my textures, find my desk boxy texture, and drag and drop that into my texture area for my desk boxy material. And there we go. As you can see, it is, well, it's that image slapped onto a material. So now let's take that material and put it on the table. I'm just going to drag and drop it on top of it like that. And now we have like a gray table, but you can kind of see the outlines of our UV layout. But what we need to do now is add an image on top of it, because we're trying to create a wooden table, not a gray cardboard paper table or whatever. Kind of looks like computer paper or something like that. But yeah, so let's go into GIMP, and I'm going to show you a trick for trying to figure out what all of these different faces are inside of our UV layout, because it's kind of hard to tell what all of these different parts are. So one thing I like to do is create a new layer. There's my new layer window. I'm going to leave it as transparent and, you know, the default size and all that. I'm going to leave that there like that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my brush and I'm going to scribble on all of these shapes with bright colors. So I'm going to start off with a bright red, and I'm just going to scribble just like that. Now I'm going to switch to, say, bright blue, and I'm going to scribble on that. It doesn't have to be perfect whatsoever. Now I'm going to do a green, and I'll scribble on that. Now I'm going to do, I don't know, pink or purple, and I'm going to scribble on that. So I'm just scribbling all over the place. And let's just continue doing this. Let's do kind of like a turquoise or an aqua color. Let's scribble on that. And let's see, what other colors do we have left? Let's do orange. Let's scribble along there. There we go. All right, perfect. All right, and oh man, I'm running out of colors. Let's do yellowish green, and let's just scribble over all of those. We can come back and add more detailed scribbles later if we need to, and let's just scribble over top of all of those as well. And let's use a hot pink color, just like that. And let's scribble over, make sure I get all those faces, scribble over all of those. And now that is on a layer that we can turn on and off, because we obviously don't want that in our final image. I mean, it doesn't look very pretty whatsoever, but we're going to use this scribble color information to figure out what all of these different faces are. So I'm going to hit Control S and then Control E to export it. So S to save the GIMP file, and then E to export it as a JPEG, and it will overwrite the last image that we have. And now you can see we have bright colors over here in the material, and because that material is on our table, we have bright colors on our table, and we can see what all of those different faces were. Kind of looks like a little kid scribbled on the table with some crayons or something. And I can press that button to make the lights a little bit easier to see what we're looking at. So yeah, I guess now we know what to work with, and now we know what all of those different shapes are based on the different colors that are scribbled on those faces. So now when I go into GIMP, I can just keep on turning this on and off. Like, you know, I can turn this off and be like, okay, I know that's the top of the table because that was red. And in Unity, the top of the table is red. So go back to GIMP. And so there's the red one. So I just turn that off, create a new layer, hit OK. And, you know, I can start creating my table on top of that. But one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a universal wooden sort of texture that goes over everything, because, well, this is a wooden table and all of it's going to be made out of wood, and I can add extra detail to these different parts later. Well, honestly, it's all going to be wood, so I don't know how much detail I can really add, but that's one thing I like to do with when I'm UV mapping and when I'm creating a texture. Sometimes I like to just have a base like texture that applies towards everything, and then I can add more detail to different surfaces so that if I miss something, it's still going to have that default texture that goes over everything. So to do that, I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool. I'm going to pick a color that looks kind of like wood. I'm going to grab like an orangish color, kind of get like a tannish brown. Maybe we can make it like a little bit more red. Maybe it's like an oak table or something like that. I don't really know. Yeah, that generally looks like the color that I want. And I'm going to do the paint bucket tool. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to go to Filter, Noise, HSV Noise. And I'm going to add some noise. I want to add more noise than that, maybe a little more. That's good. And I'm going to do a horizontal motion blur. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and I'm going to change that angle to 0. And I'm going to change the length until it just kind of looks like wood. I don't want to make it too long. I think that kind of looks like wood, like that. So let's try that, and let's go ahead and save that and hit Control E, and let's just see what it looks like. There we go. That kind of does look like a wood table. It actually looks really good. Fairly realistic, actually. So there's little bits of detail that we could add. We can make the top of the table a little bit scratched. Maybe one kid in school wrote, like, you know, Joey was here, or whatever his name is. You know, we can add little shadows to the edge of our table and stuff like that. But one thing that jumps out to me right now is that the wood is going horizontally. The grain is horizontal on these legs, and I want the grain to go up and down because I think that that would just make more sense and be more realistic. Oh, and one thing I want to point out is see that this is a little bit more pixelized than the top of the table, and that is because, like I said, we shrunk it down inside of Blender. I think it was those shapes right there. We shrunk them down, and that made it so that it got less detail. Whoops, let me go back to Unity. It got less detail there, so it's a little bit pixelized. So we can fix that. Actually, one thing I'm going to do, I might as well just fix that right now. I'm going to go to Blender. I'm going to grab all of those shapes. Actually, I'm going to box select it to make it go even faster. Select all of those, and I'm going to scale them up. and I'll move them probably right there. That's probably good. So one thing to note is that when I save this, when I save over that, and now I have edited my UV layout, and my UV layout is now different from what it was before. Inside of GIMP, you know, our UV layout, see how it's right there? Really, it's down there because, well, we would need to update this if we want to see what all of this is. But at least in this example, you know, we have the base of everything being wood, so I don't really care about the detail of all of those little parts right there. I just want to make them a little bit bigger, and I'll move them down there, and I know that they'll probably look pretty good. So if I go into Unity, you'll see, there we go. Well, it's probably very hard to see, but that part right there is a little less pixely. So yeah, all right, let's get back to what I was talking about before. I want to make these lines vertical, and I guess there's two different ways I could do that. I could go into Blender and I could take all of these and I could rotate them 90 degrees. That would actually probably be the best answer in this case, but I'm going to show you another thing that we can do. We can go into GIMP and actually edit the texture itself. And I'm going to create, well, actually what I'm going to do is, how am I going to do this? Well, I guess what I want to do is I'm just going to box select something like that. It doesn't really matter. I can edit that in a little bit and trim it down, but I just want to get like a long rectangle going with the length of the grain of the wood, the direction that the wood is moving. So I'm going to box select that, make sure I have that layer selected, and I'm going to go up to edit and then copy and then paste. And it doesn't matter. I can also press Control C and Control V, and I wonder why it did that. I'm going to press Control Z again. I wonder, maybe do I need to deselect that and then hit Control V? Let's see. If I move this around, okay. That does seem to be working. I'm just confused as to why I don't have like a little thumbnail listed right here. Do I go to Simplify Layer? Oh well, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Maybe it has something to do with it being selected. Well, maybe not. I'm not really sure why it doesn't have a little thumbnail right there, but at least I can see it. I can move it around and I can see that I'm moving it, so that's what I wanted to do. So now let's rotate this. So let's grab our rotate tool, and I'm trying to remember, is this a rotate tool? Yeah, there it goes. Rotate tool. I'm going to select that tool. I'm going to click on that to rotate it, and I can either just drag it and rotate it manually like that, but I want to make it perfectly up and down, so I'm going to set this to 90. Hit enter. There we go. Now it's 90 degrees. I'm going to hit rotate. And now when I grab my move tool and move this around, you can see that at least in this square, the grain's going up and down instead of horizontal. So one thing I want to do is I want to get that out of my way so that I can actually see what I'm doing. And I want to move that right there. And that copy and paste thing is really throwing me off. I'm wondering why it's doing that. Anchor layer? Is that what I want to do? Nope, that's not what I want to do. It's just a little bit different from what I'm used to. Oh, I think this is what I'm supposed to write, is to new layer, because I want to separate itself. I guess it's still connected to this layer because I did the copy and paste. So let me right click, go to new layer. There we go. That's what I was trying to do. I just wanted to separate that just to absolutely make sure that it was its own layer. So now let me turn that off, and now I can see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to put that there. I'm actually going to grab my box tool. I'm going to grab that with my box, and I'm going to press, does delete work? Yes, just the delete key. Well, one thing I can do is I can make it a little bit transparent so I can see what I'm doing. So let me grab my box select tool. I'm going to select this area over here because I don't need it. I'm going to hit delete. And now let's bring my opacity all the way back up again. And now we have an area where the lines are going vertical. So now I can turn that back on. Let me deselect all this stuff here. And yeah, there we go. So we have a little bit of vertical lines right there, and the rest is horizontal. So let's Control S to save our GIMP file, and Control E to export it into Unity. And now, bam, now those are going vertically, and that is what I wanted. And well, there is our table texture. And we can go back and we can add more detail to it. Like, you know, like I said, like let's say, no, let's create a new layer, and I'm gonna, create a new layer above my wood layer, but I'm going to turn my wood layer off so that I can see the UV layout. And on this layer, the new layer that I created above it, I'm going to use my paintbrush to create some scratches on this. So I'm going to hit Control mouse wheel to zoom in, and then middle mouse to drag it over. It's very similar to Blender actually with the middle mouse. And I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool. Where the heck is it? There it is. And I'm going to find a paintbrush that looks kind of like scratches. Maybe that. And I'm going to set this to a darker color like that. So it's still brown but just a little darker. I'm just going to add some scratches here and there. Just because, well, the top of a desk is more likely to get bumps and nicks in it because, well, that's where you set stuff on top of it. You know, maybe you'll accidentally like put a pencil on top of that desk. So yeah, maybe not the most realistic scratches, but it adds a little bit of detail. I'm going to turn that back on so we can now see it. Maybe I can lower the opacity of it. Maybe I don't want to make them too pronounced. Just a little bit of detail. And if I hold down Control and mouse wheel to zoom out, you can see, yeah, we have a couple of little dots over the area where the top of the table is going to be. So I'm going to press Control S and Control E to export, and let's go into Unity and see how it looks. So yeah, now we have a couple of little dots on the top of our table. And we can go in, we can add more detail if we want. You know, maybe we want to make these edges a little bit darker. Yeah, let's go ahead and give that a try. So let's go into GIMP. Let's get rid of that so I can see what I'm doing. And, you know, let's say I forgot. I'm like, oh, wait, what face was the edges? I can go to that. I can press Control S, E, then I can go into Unity, and oh, pink. So let's find where pink is on the GIMP file. Oh, it's these up here. So I can turn that layer off again, and then I can know that, all right, I want to make these lines up here a little bit darker. So how should we do that? Well, I guess what we can do is let's create a selection. So let's grab our box select tool. Let's first select these top ones up here. Now let's hold down Shift to add to our selection and add these bottom ones right here. So now we have a shape that goes around that selection there, just like that, so that we only affect that area. Now let me turn my wooden layer back on, and I'm going to copy and paste it. So I'm going to select that layer, I'm going to press Control C, Control V, and now I've created a layer up there like that, but now this layer is still linked to that layer right there. So I'm going to right click on it and go to New Layer to make it its own layer that I can turn on and off. And you'll see that when I go to Colors, Levels, and if I make my darks darker by dragging over the black triangle, you can see that I am making it darker in that area. And when I turn that on and off, you can see it is a separate layer. And I can also move it around as well, but we know that it wants to be right there, so I'm going to press Control Z and put it back where it was. So now I'm going to press Control S, Control E, and now let's take a look at it inside of Unity. Bam, there we go. Now that edge is just a tiny bit darker. So we can go in and we can keep on adding little bits of detail like that and making this desk look more and more realistic and adding more and more detail to it and making it look really awesome. Actually, those scratches I think look more like dirt. Oh well, I guess I'll leave them for now. We could always add to them later, but this tutorial is already getting pretty long, and there are a lot of steps to follow to do everything that I did in this episode, and honestly, that UV mapping was kind of complicated. So yeah, if you don't get everything perfect the first time, that's perfectly okay. Sometimes when I'm being lazy and I just can't figure out the UV mapping, like for the example, this face right here, remember it gave me a lot of issues when I was looking at the underside of the table. Well, you can just select all of it and just select all of those lines and mark seam on all of those lines and just go ahead and let it be cut apart, and then you'll have just a bunch of random stuff around here that you can all just throw into a pile and overlap, and it really doesn't matter that much, especially when we're working with, you know, something like, you know, just a wood texture that's going to be a very similar texture that goes over top of the entire thing. So that's just like one area that you can be lazy. So yeah, so I'm going to just leave you with trying to redo what I did just there, because it's probably going to be a little bit complicated. But like I said in the past, this UV mapping, it's going to make more and more sense as we go on, and we're going to learn more and more about how to do UV mapping. And now that I think about it, I keep on mentioning this button right here, but I didn't explain it in this episode, did I? Oh well, we'll do that in the next episode. This episode's already too long. Alright, cool. So, good luck with the UV mapping. It's kind of complicated, but you'll get a hang of it. So, until my next episode, I will see you later, and keep making games.